Noach, the storyline is very well known, and Noach is the hero of the story. There are some, later on we find some villains as well. Actually, even within his own household, not all of his children even were particularly righteous. Maybe some were not. But of course, Noach is the ancestor of all of us, of all of mankind. We're descended from Adam, but after 10 generations, God felt the need to press the reset button, and therefore we are all B'nai Noach. And maybe for that reason, it is apropos that the Parasha begins, Eile toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach. These are the descendants, literally toldos are the descendants of Noach. Or as I said, possibly the generations of Noach. And we are all descendants of Noach. So what Noach brings to the table more than any other person is descendants. But the Torah right away comments, Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorosav. And it's only in the next verse that we say that Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So if we look at the very first pasuk, Eile told us Noach ish tzaddik. These are the generations of Noach, and then we have an important, let's say, not so much parentheses, but a elaboration on the nature and the character of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. He was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'dorosav. He was perfect in his generations. Es ha-Elohim hishalech Noach. Noach walked with God. Very high praise. Well, of course, I'm not saying the Torah is setting him up for a downfall, but we have here the very well-known machlokes that Rashi records about whether Noach was righteous in an absolute sense or he was righteous relative to his generation. And the fact that the Torah says he was righteous in his generations implies that somehow his righteousness was either amplified by the context of his generation or possibly diminished as a result. And we will get to that well-known machlokas shortly. But I want to start with the observation just about the word toldos, Eile toldos Noach. It could be that the word toldos here is meant not so much in terms of children or progeny or descendants, but in terms of impact. Toldos Noach, as the Radak and others say, toldos is used in the sense of the events that unfolded in his lifetime. Eile toldos Noach, like his experiences, the events that befell him, or as we know, the events in which he was a primary mover, especially the ark and saving the animals, etc. So Eile toldos Noach, we can explain the fact that the children are only mentioned in the next verse in terms of the story that follows, the story of the grand dramatic events that would happen in his lifetime. So toldos means the impact of Noach. And in this sense, says my friend for the year, Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz, we can explain the fact that Noach is distinct from Avraham. Of course, he's distinct from everyone, but in particular, we find that the sages compare and contrast him to the next great, possibly greater Torah personality that we meet in the context of the sequence of the Parashos, and that is Avraham. In fact, Avraham will be introduced to us at the end of Parashas Noach. We already have the reference to the birth of Avraham. Says the Meforshim that Avraham accomplished something much greater than Noach, in the sense that Noach had 3 children or 3 sons, and they had descendants, etc. But Avraham was able to impact upon the world beyond just the progeny that he produced, but his interaction with his fellow man had such a profound influence upon them that Avraham, in the words of the Meforshim, Avraham recruited or attracted converts. Avraham taught people about the oneness of God, about the teachings of God, about the principles of humanitarianism, of monotheism, what we call today ethical monotheism. Avraham had toldos, had impact that was not limited to his biological descendants, but rather he attracted a whole following of people who were drawn close to the Shekhinah through the activism of Avraham. That Avraham was the kind of electric personality, and we might even say the activist, maybe even the extrovert type of personality. So Eila told us Noach, the Torah here is in a subtle way saying that Noach's descendants were only that. He had 3 sons. Of course, from them, the whole of mankind ensued. But his impact and his influence upon others was scant. And as we know, when the flood began, Noah took into the ark his own immediate family, all of those animals, of course, and nobody else got on board with him. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says,
screaming.
Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says that with this we can also resolve a question which the Meforshim ask regarding the opinion of the Rambam. Because the Rambam writes in the beginning of the laws of Avodah Zarah, in Halacha base, the Rambam writes that Ad Avraham, listen closely, until Avraham lo haya makir be'emuna b'Kadosh Baruch Hu. There was no one who recognized or who avowed the belief in God until Avraham. Umakshim says, Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz, that the Meforshim ask, is this really so? What about our guy, Noach? Even though we are maybe diminishing his stature in certain subtle ways, but the Torah says he was righteous, he was perfect in his generations. And what about Mesushelach, who we don't know that much about, but according to our tradition, he was a righteous person. Chanoch, we know, was righteous. Again, the Torah doesn't tell us a lot about him. It says he walked with God. Noah, Chanoch. And there certainly were people before Avraham who recognized God, who served Hashem. So why does the Rambam say that until Avraham there was no one who avowed the belief in the Almighty? He says the explanation could be the word makir. Makir means to know or to recognize, but it could also mean that he was the first one to cause others to recognize God. He was the first one, Avram was the first one to proclaim, to advance, to promote the belief in God. There were other righteous people, but Avram was the first, to use a 20th or 21st century expression, the first outreach activist. That was Avraham. Noach wasn't that way. So therefore he says, Eila told us Noach, the generations of Noach are his progeny, but his impact did not extend, as in the case of Avraham, to so many others as well. We will soon see a further analysis of the character of Noach a little bit later in our discussion this evening. Let's go on now to the ark. Now, the dimensions of the ark are fairly well known. I won't quiz you on it, but I'll just point out the pasuk. It's chapter 6, verse 15. The Torah says that the ark should have the following dimensions: a length of 300 amot, and amma is a cubit, which is about half a meter approximately. 300 cubits in length, orach hateveh 50 amma rachba, 50 cubits in width, and 30 cubits in height. So 100 by 50 by 30. As I said, these dimensions are fairly well known because it's the first time in the Torah, I believe, that we have a specification, a kind of building spec for the size of this craft, or this sea craft or ark. So Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz has a very clever drash on this. The ark, of course, saved Noach and all the animals when the world was going into liquidation, as they say. Noach was the first investor. He was a venture capitalist. He floated the company when the whole world was going into liquidation. So the ark symbolizes the protection, the way in which Noach was preserved, and Noach and the animals were preserved, and when the rest of the world was destroyed by the flood. So he says the following: the ark symbolizes the protective nature of Hashem, who was sort of, as I say, surrounding Noach within that ark. He says the remez is that the name of God, as we know, is spelled Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. This is the so-called tetragrammaton, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. So he says the dimensions of the ark suggest the name of God. Yud times Hey is how much? Yud, I'm talking about in gematria. Yud is, of course, 10. Hey, we know is 5. So Yud times Hey, 10 times 5 is 50. So that is the width of the ark. Then 50 times 6. So Yud and Hey, and then Vav. So as I said, Yud times Hey is Yud times Hey is 50, then 50 times the Vav, 50 times 6 is 300. So there you have the length of the ark. And then Vav and Hey, the last two letters of the name of God, Vav and Hey, 6 times 5 is 30. So there you have the dimensions of the ark, which symbolically is a way of indicating that God's presence, symbolized by the name of Hashem, Yud, Hey, Vav and Hey, was enveloped them at that to protect them. But then he says something further as well, which is very clever. He says these dimensions, 30 and 350 in gematria. So 30 is lamed, 300 of course is shin, and 50 is nun. So lamed shin nun spells lashon. Without the vav, we don't need the vav. In Hebrew, we can pronounce lashon, just with the dot on top. So lashon is tongue or speech. So he says that the need for that teva, the need for that ark, was a consequence of the fact that Noach failed to exercise his power of speech. It's interesting. Lashon, the tongue, capacity of speech, is frequently decried by rabbis for its misuse. Not just rabbis like contemporary rabbis, but the sages, very frequently, the misuse of speech, the abuse of speech. But of course, the tongue is such an essential human facility. And in particular, Noach should have used his tongue to pray for the people, or maybe I should say, and also to rebuke them, to inspire them, to teach them, to guide them, to remonstrate with them, to lead them. He should have done all of that with his tongue, and he didn't, or I should say, and to pray for them. So therefore, the need for the ark was a consequence of Noach's failure. Of course, he was the hero in the sense that he remained righteous and he built the ark, etc. But at the same time, it hints to his failing in that he did not utilize his lashon. But then he says something further. And of course, in this way, he's different than Moshe, because as we'll see in a moment, Moshe Rabbeinu did remonstrate with the people and rebuke them. He gave them the Torah. I mean, that's the biggest thing Moshe did. He conveyed the Torah to us, Torah Tzivah Lanu Moshe, but he frequently rebuked the Jewish people and remonstrated with them. And of course, he very frequently prayed for them. Noach didn't do either of those. Then Rabbi Eibeschutz says that in the place of lashon, which he should have used, so he's got the ark, which hints to lashon because of the dimensions, the 30 by 300 by 50 lashon. He says that after the letters that follow lashon, the letters that follow lamed, shin, and mem, lamed. I'm sorry, yeah, the letters that follow lamed, shin, and nun. So following the nun is samech, following the shin is taf, the last letter of the alphabet, and following the lamed is mem. So you have the letters satam, samech, taf, mem, samech, taf, mem, which means to seal or to close. Satum means occluded or closed or sealed. Like it says, Satam Tefilati, it says in Eicha. In other words, he was silent when he should have spoken out. He should have used his power of speech. He neglected to do so. So that is hinted to in the letters that follow. And what about the letters that precede Lamed Shin Nun? So very cleverly, he observes that Lamed Shin Nun, the letters that precede them, before the Lamed is Chaf, before the Shin is Reish, and before the Nun is Mem. It spells Kerem. Kerem, of course, is the vineyard. And after he left the ark, V'yita Kerem, he planted a vineyard, which possibly was also not the best thing to do, but that's what he did. So again, the dimensions of the ark hint to various aspects of the career of Noach, primarily the heroism of Noach, but also derech remez, the fact that he failed to use his lashon, but rather it was satum. He just kept his mouth quiet and got on with his construction of this ark for 120 years. And then afterwards, possibly he was traumatized by the experience of the desolation of the world, and he planted a vineyard, which also sadly led to his degradation. Okay, I want to get to what I would like to consider, I hope you'll agree, as the punchline of our shir tonight, because Rabbi Eibeschutz has a most original observation. So we've mentioned already that Noach, and probably you already know, that Noach is likened, or is rather contrasted by the rabbis with Avraham and Rashi, the famous first Rashi on the Parasha, where it says that some of our sages interpret the nature or the achievements of Noach in a favorable manner. That is to say, despite the influence of his generation, he was still righteous. And others say, well, no, only relative to his generation. But in the days of Avram, he would not have been that highly regarded at all, because Avram is so much greater than Noach. Okay, that's the simple understanding. So the comparison to Avraham is well known. It's hinted to in the Mishnah Pirkei Avos as well. 10 generations from Adam to Noach, a further 10 generations from Noach to Avraham. So again, we have that comparison. But the other great personality to whom Noach is compared and contrasted, and again, possibly not in a favorable way, is Moshe. Having said that, I don't think anyone could be compared favorably to Moshe Rabbeinu, but nevertheless, and this is what I like to explore, to share with you, there is a certain sense in which Moshe and Noah had important things in common. The Medrash at the very end of the Torah, by the way, says that Moshe is called Ish HaElokim, the man of God. And the Medrash says that Moshe at the end of his life is called Ish HaElokim, and Noach, not at the end, well, okay, but Noach, I won't say the beginning of his life, but the beginning of his career, the beginning of our account of our familiarity with Noach, he is called Ish Elokim Salakim Yisalech Noach. He walked with God. So Noach is initially described as someone who walks with God, and Moshe at the end of his life is Ish Elokim. So there's that comparison, and of course, Noach's achievements do not measure up to those of Moshe Rabbeinu. But here is where, so much so familiar, but here is where Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz goes off in a very original direction. If you take a look in chapter 8, verses 15 and 16. Vadaber Elokim el Noach lemor. So chapter 8, verses 15 and 16. It's the beginning of the fourth Aliyah, if you're following it from that point of view. Vaidaber Elohim el Noach lemor. God spoke to Noach saying. Now it's notable that the word or the name of God used here is Elohim. And Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz and many other Mefarshim are alert to the use of the name of God, of Hashem or Elohim. The classic name of God is the one that we encounter most often, is what we call the Tetragrammaton. We spoke about it a few minutes ago. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. We have innumerable times in the Torah. But here it's Vaydaber Elokim el Noach lemor. Elokim is Midas Hadin. That is to say, the name of God, which is expressed by Elokim, represents God as the judge. So it connotes a more discerning, maybe a harsher, more exacting term, and it's associated with Midas Hadin. The name of Hashem, of Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, what we call the Shem Havaya, is Midas HaRachamim. So so to speak, Hashem is approaching or addressing Noach in an exacting way, in a kind of judgmental fashion. And he says to him, well, he's got good news for him. Tsei min hateva, go out from the ark, ata v'ishtecha, you and your wife, uvanecha unishevanecha itach, and your children and the wives of your children, your sons and the wives of your sons with you. He's got 3 sons, and the 3 sons have wives. Noach has a wife, Naamah, right. So Hashem says, "You time to leave. You've been in the ark for a year. Okay, life is now going to resume a more normal pattern, and you can undertake the program of rebuilding the world." So, what is interesting here is that the Torah says clearly, Ata v'ishtecha, you and your wife. Now you might say this is not surprising. You and your wife. I mean, firstly, Noach and his wife are a married couple. He's not going to go anywhere without her. Certainly, he's not going to leave the ark and leave her behind. Besides which, and this is probably the intent, you and your wife, meaning it's time to go about the matter of rebuilding the world. And actually, this is clear from the next verse as well. Pasuk Yud Zayin. Kol hachaya asher itcha mikol basar bo uvayim v'chol harem sarim saratz hitzei itach v'shartzu v'aretz. They shall spread about the earth, ufaru v'ravu, and they shall increase and multiply al haaretz, upon the earth. But take a look at the next pasuk. Look closely at it. Yud Ches. Vayetzei Noach uvanav v'ishto nishev avito. Noach and his sons and his wife and Noach and his sons and his wife and the wives of his sons with him, they all left. I'm sure you've noticed the subtle distinction. Hashem said to Moshe, to Noach, go out with your wife, your sons, and their wives. But in fact, Noach went with his sons and his wife went separately with the women. And if you recall the fact that when they first entered the ark, the Torah says Noach and his sons, his wife and his sons' wives, implying that during the time of when they were cooped up in that ark, they were discouraged or maybe forbidden from engaging in marital relations. And the logic for that is that the world is in dissolution. It's not a time to be pursuing personal pleasures, besides which I'm sure things were crowded enough in the ark as is. They couldn't afford, I suppose, the space for additional people. But it's not so much the space, but rather the morality of it. Take a look at Rashi. I hope you have Rashi's commentary with you. In Pasuk Tes Zayin, Atavi Ishtecha, you and your wife, says Rashi explicitly, Ish v'ishto, man and his wife. Kan hitir lehem tashmish hamita. Here, marital relations was expressly permitted to them. Had not been permitted during the year in the ark. So Hashem says, I've got doubly good news for you. You can get out of the ark, and also you can resume married life in the normal way. So presumably, we would expect Noach, unless he needs some marital counseling, to be pleased at this prospect. But it's interesting that, as we've seen already, he didn't exactly do it. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz something which I think is very novel. He says that Noach thought, I am going to be the lawgiver. I am going to be the means, the medium through which Hashem will give Torah to the world. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who bequeathed Torah to the Jewish people and to the world. So I can do the same, or rather, maybe I can do it instead of Moshe. I will be the one. And at first, I thought this is a completely unrealistic or daft thought. But Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz says, hey, have we never heard of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? He did give some mitzvahs, some quite important mitzvahs. In fact, according to some, the 7 mitzvahs B'nai Noach are not just 7 compared to 613 in the Torah, but there are 7 categories. They may subsume among those 7 a large number of the Taryag mitzvahs, certainly not all, but a large proportion of them possibly are included among the 7. So in a certain sense, Noach did, so to speak, bequeath Torah to the world. Moreover, the Talmud says Moshe min haTorah minayin, a very cryptic question in the Talmud. Where do we find Moshe in the Torah? And of course, the answer is blazingly obvious. Moshe is mentioned in the Torah countless times. But the Talmud means to say, where is the name of Moshe hinted to in the Torah before we actually meet him? And the Talmud answers, the pasuk says, "B'shagam hu basar." Excuse me. At the end of Parshas Bereshis, Hashem says, "I'm not going to um, uh, tolerate this human race that much longer because they are so degenerate, and this venture of humanity has proven to be very disappointing." So on the other hand, Hashem says, perhaps I can't really fault them that much. They're just flesh and blood. Anyway, bishagam hu basar. Lo yadon ruchi ba'adam la'olam. I'm not going to tolerate this human species any longer. Bishagam hu basar. He's only flesh and blood. I'll limit his years to 120. That's at the end of Parshas, near the end of Parshas Bereshis. Says the Gemara, b'shagam gematria Moshe. Yonatan Eibeschutz observes that this is hinted to in the generation of the flood. This is a reference to the generation of the flood. In other words, Noach and Moshe have quite a lot in common, besides which the name Moshe was given to him by the daughter of Paro, and I'm sure you know that she herself says, Min hamayim mishitihu, I have drawn him from the water. So Moshe, like Noach, was saved from the waters, and Moshe came very close, we would imagine, to a watery grave, or maybe a breakfast for a crocodile. Moshe was drawn from the water by the daughter of Paro, Noach as well. Moshe is hinted to Beshagam hu basar, the generation of the flood. The problem is that Noach, as we've seen already, fell far short of the virtuosity of Moshe vis-a-vis praying for the people, supporting the people, rebuking the people, engaging with the people. So this is why, although he thought he could be like Moshe, it was not to be, because he didn't have that quality that Moshe had. What does it have to do with the marital relations? And Noach went out from the ark just with his boys. His wife went separately with the women. Of course, Moshe separated from his wife because Moshe was on such a high level. He did separate from his wife. Maybe he was criticized for it. Maybe it was justified, but he did. So Noach thought, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to be the one through whom the Torah is going to be given to mankind. But in reality, Moshe had the quality of engaging with the people. And that's why it says, Vaydaber Elokim, the Midas Hadin, because, says Yonatan Eibeschutz, Hashem, so to speak, was conveying to Noach a rebuke. You're not on the level of Moshe because you did not engage with the people the way Moshe did. You did not pray for them. You didn't demonstrate that level of concern, of care for the people, but you simply sought to live your life in a righteous way, to do what you're instructed to do, but you should have been like Moshe, and because you weren't, so I cannot use, you cannot be the medium through which the Torah is given to mankind. And I'd like to add something which he doesn't really say, though he alludes to it, and this is in the Arizal. The Ari says that Moshe Rabbeinu, one of the many examples, but possibly the most dramatic example of Moshe's love and devotion and loyalty to the Jewish people, you could almost say his loyalty to the Jewish people extended even beyond his loyalty to Hashem, almost, because when Hashem said to Moshe after the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, give me a chance and I will destroy these people in a moment, Moshe did not give God the chance. And he said the famous words, forgive them, and if not, mecheni nami sifracha, wipe me out of your book, erase my name from your book, get somebody else. I'm resigning my commission. If you forgive them, fine, I'm prepared to carry on. But if you won't forgive them and you want to start over with me, I'm resigning my commission. Mecheni nami sifracha, blot my name out of the book. Mecheni na is the letters ani mi Noach. Mecheni na, mem ches nun yud, na nun aleph. It's the same letters. Ani mi Noach, says Moshe, I am a nitzotz. This I saw in the Chidah, not the remez, but the idea that Moshe is a nitzotz of Noach. Moshe rectified the shortcoming of Noach. Noach was very great, but Noach had a shortcoming. Moshe rectified it. Moshe said, you're proposing to destroy the nation, the generation, and I will be the only survivor. I'm not agreeing to that. Ani mi Noach, I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson. Mecheni na, says Moshe, Ani mi Noach. And this is the most dramatic, to me, the most dramatic example of Moshe's devotion to the Jewish people, devotion to others. Yes, he is the perfect servant of God, but he's also devoted to the people, but devoted to the generation. And I'd just like to add one final observation. Mecheni na, I thought to myself, is this word mecheni na? Why does he say mecheni na? Why doesn't he use some other way of saying take my name out or count me out or some other expression? Why mecheni na? So we said already it's osios animi Noach, but beyond that, mechinina, the word mechia is used for something which is eradicated through water. Who can tell me, because we're done with this year, you can turn on your microphone. Who can tell me, where do we find the word mechia, like limchot, that it is a reference to water, to eradication through water?
Sota?
Hey, excellent. Very good. That the name of God is erased through water in the sota. And the expression is nimcha al yidei hamayim. So that's exactly right. So I think when Moshe said mecheni na, he's hinting to his own salvation from the water, and the fact that Noach as well, Noach was saved from the water. Moshe says, you know what? I didn't want to be saved then. Why did you even save me from the water? Mecheni na, dissolve me, eradicate me. I'm resigning my commission. This is what Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says, a further aspect of this classic and quite well-known comparison of Noach and Moshe. He takes it much further in saying that Noach thought, I'm going to be the one to give the Torah to mankind. I'm doing 7 mitzvahs already. Okay, I'll do another 606, and then I'm done. I'm going to be the one to give the Torah as Moshe Rabbeinu, but he could not, because he was not deserving, because he didn't have that absolute devotion to his fellow man. And this, of course, was the famous Achilles heel, if I mix my metaphors, of Noach. Thank you very much for listening. I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos. And when we read the Parasha of Noach, a few thoughts hopefully will germinate in your mind. And thank you again for your participation. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, thank you.